Pleasure.
Thank you.
What's happened? Big thanks to Liz Brown for producing the show. Checkpoint with Lisa Owen is next. I'm back tomorrow from 3:45.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo Irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere ake nei, Green Minister Amelia Davidson reverses up on comments about white men and violence, blaming the shock of being clipped by a motorbike for her word jumble. A decision on the Fix-It plan for a vital Coromandel highway is still months away. The scramble to ban all caged egg production, what would that mean for price and supply? Shunned and kicked in the guts is how some cyclone-hit residents are feeling 2 months on, and claims the demise of inner-city Wellington is bringing hospo businesses to their knees. And Feijoas are a little bit scuffed up this season, but growers say it's what's on the inside that counts. You can watch us live on the RNZ website, Facebook and Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5. Ngā mihi o te ahi, ko Mark Leishman, tēnei. The Prime Minister says Amelia Davidson's comments about white cis men being responsible for violence were not appropriate. The Greens co-leader made the remarks during a heated exchange with a far-right activist in Auckland over the weekend. Ms Davidson has since acknowledged she misspoke and her comments should have been clearer. She says the encounter took place shortly after she'd been struck by a motorcyclist and she was still in shock. Chris Hipkins says considering what had just happened to Ms Davidson, she should get some leeway.
I certainly don't think it was appropriate, but I think in the circumstances, I think some leeway should be given to someone saying something which on reflection they felt didn't convey what they were intending to convey.
Chris Hipkins says his officials told Amelia Davidson's office to clarify her comments. The detective who led the investigation into Grace Mullane's death says her murderer's failure to have his convictions dismissed for sexual violence on 2 other women will be a relief for the victims. The Court of Appeal says neither of the sentences handed down to Jesse Kempson contained any errors of law. The additional sentences were imposed on him for raping a woman he met on Tinder and sexually assaulting a former partner. Detective Inspector Scott Beard expects that the court's decision will be reassuring for the victims.
I've had the officer who dealt with the victims make contact with them. I haven't had feedback at this time. I just sense that this decision will be a huge relief for those victims.
Scott Beard says the sentence also provides closure for the police investigation team. The father of one of the 29 men who died in the Pike River mine says a new ruling by the High Court will make a substantial change to the justice system. The High Court has ruled that 2 men whose sons died in the explosion can now see privileged material which led to WorkSafe dropping charges against the mine CEO Peter Whittle. Bernie Monk, whose son Michael died in the disaster, says Justice Gillian Mellon has helped them take a big step forward towards truth and accountability.
She's changed the course of justice and will stop people from using legal privilege. And another word that they use is in the best interest of the country to get transparency and the truth. So I think she's going to change the way that that's going to be done.
Bernie Monk says they're now waiting for a date to view the material. The co-organiser of a Queenstown housing protest is worried what will happen to people living in cars and tents as a cold blast approaches. Met Services issued a heavy snow watch for the Queenstown Lakes and Central Otago from midnight until midday tomorrow. Hannah Sullivan says she is homeless and temporarily living with a neighbour after her landlord told her to vacate. She says people in Queenstown are living in cars, hostels, tents and couch surfing as they can't find anywhere to live.
I'm really worried about their safety and their health at this point. So we want action. We want to see these people who have the power to do something actually doing something, not just speaking about it.
The protesters will meet at 6:30 on the Queenstown lakefront. A major Australian financial services company has revealed that a cyber hack earlier this month was far worse than originally thought. Latitude Financial says the details of almost 8 million driving licence numbers were stolen in Australia and New Zealand. The breach could allow the thieves access to account holders' dates of birth, addresses and phone numbers. More than 50,000 passport numbers were also stolen. The hack is being investigated by the Australian Federal Police. It is 5:04. An investigation is underway after a fatal workplace accident in Manawatu, Whanganui district. Emergency services were called to Mangamahu, a remote farming and forest area off State Highway 4, shortly before midday. WorkSafe has been notified and the death is being referred to the coroner. And out of sport, the absence of several of the Black Caps' senior limited overs players has prompted the recall of Tom Latham to the T20 side for the first time since 2021. With the likes of Kane Williamson, Tim Southee and Mitchell Santner playing in the Indian Premier League, coach Gary Stead has brought Latham into the T20 lineup to play against Sri Lanka at home and Pakistan away. Latham is currently leading the Black Caps one-day side, with New Zealand having trounced Sri Lanka by 198 runs in the series opener in Auckland yesterday.
Tom hasn't played a lot of T20 cricket domestically, but he's been a stalwart in the white ball team for us, and he's been a captain as well. And when you take out, I think, a lot of the leaders that we've had as well, then it became pretty logical for us that we wanted some experience there and a guy who was calm under pressure like Tom is.
Meanwhile, Game 2 of the one-day series takes place in Christchurch tomorrow, while the three-match T20 series between Sri Lanka and the Black Caps starts in Auckland on Sunday. Manager Antonio Conte has left the Premier League club Tottenham by mutual consent after 16 months in charge. Conte called the Spurs players selfish and criticised the club's culture in a news conference after their recent draw at Southampton. Australian supercar champion Shane van Gisbergen will compete in 4 rounds of this year's New Zealand Rally Championship. He will miss this weekend's opening round in Otago as it clashes with the supercars Australian GP round, but he will contest all 4 North Island rounds starting with Whangarei in May. And American Sam Burns has won the WGC Match Play Championship final in Texas. And that's the news.
A million protesters pack French streets.
We're seeing garbage burning and much of the country on fire.
Aotearoa's trans advocates turn out in force.
We saw the thousands of people coming out in support of trans communities. There was a lot of joy, there was a lot of celebration.
And Donald Trump calls for mass support.
Either the deep state destroys America or we destroy the deep state.
Do not go off half-cocked. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
RNZ National on air, online and on demand very shortly. We'll have Lisa Owen and Checkpoint, the team all ready to go. But right now, let's take a look at that short forecast. This is from Met Service and it's till midnight Tuesday. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty. Isolated showers, possibly thundery about inland Bay of Plenty and Rotorua today. Waikato, Waitomo, Taumaranui and Taupo. Scattered showers, mainly afternoons and evenings, possibly thundery today. Taranaki to Kapiti. We've got isolated showers tomorrow, but rain for a time. For Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Taihape and Wellington, scattered showers and possible thunderstorms about Hawke's Bay and Gisborne today, rain spreading north from midday tomorrow. For Nelson, Buller and Westland, isolated showers, but rain spreading north overnight, clearing tomorrow. Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago. Rain spreading north tonight, tomorrow morning, then easing to scattered showers with snow above 500 metres in Canterbury and Otago. Fiordland and Southland, rain spreading north this evening and overnight, snow above 400 metres, possibly heavy. Showers tomorrow with snow above 400 metres in the morning. And for the Chatham Islands, showers. It is coming up to 8 minutes past 5. I'll have headlines for you at about 20 past. More news at 6. Now here's Checkpoint with Lisa.
Nā mihi Mark, tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The Greens co-leader, Amelia Davidson, has caused a stir after she told a far-right activist it is white cis men who cause violence in the world. Opposition parties have criticised the remarks, which were made after Saturday's Auckland protest, and are calling for her to resign. But Ms Davidson says she was in shock and misspoke after being hit by a motorcycle. The Prime Minister says her comments were not appropriate, but has accepted her explanation. Our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch, reports.
Trans people are terrific.
So you condone that violence? You condone that violence against her?
A heated exchange following a heated protest. The Greens co-leader Amelia Davidson confronted by a far-right activist while departing the Auckland rally opposing Posey Parker on Saturday.
What did you guys think of Posey Parker being violently assaulted and having what looked like tomato sauce tipped all over her?
We are here to reject the violence and hate of transphobia.
The interview, captured by the conspiracist outlet Counterspin Media, continues as Ms Davidson walks, flanked by a small number of Green MPs and supporters. She then pivots and references her job as Minister for the Prevention of Family and Sexual Violence.
I am a prevention violence minister, and I know who causes violence in the world. It is white cis men. That is white cis men.
Okay, but so
Cis is short for cisgender, that is, someone who is not transgender. The confronting remark has prompted outrage from opposition parties. In a statement, Nationals leader Christopher Luxon says it is harmful, wrong and offensive. Ex-David Seymour says it's immature and unprofessional.
You could take statistics which show Maori imprisonment rates are around 3 times higher per head of population. But anybody who made a statement to the effect of crime is committed by Maori would be rightly pilloried.
New Zealand First has also climbed in from outside of Parliament. Winston Peters says Ms Davidson must resign.
It's an extraordinary, unfortunate statement, in utter bad taste, totally wrong. It's extremely generically racist in the concept, the way she put it, because what she's saying is it's only white men, and white straight men at that.
RNZ requested an interview with Amelia Davidson, but she declined, instead issuing a statement. In it, she says the encounter took place shortly after she'd been struck by a motorcyclist. She says she was still in shock, and her intention was to support trans people. She says, however, she should have made clear that violence occurs in every community.
She's absolutely not fit for the role. It's really up to the Prime Minister and the Green Party to decide if they can find anyone better. If they can't, then I think the voters are going to have to get rid of a whole lot of them.
The Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, was also unimpressed with the remarks and the reference to race. But he says he accepts Ms Davidson's explanation. He says he does not expect perfection from his ministers.
I think we do need to consider the context in which she made her remarks. She'd just been hit by a motorcycle and was basically being harassed by a right-wing conspiracy group as she went down the road. That's not a form of words that I would choose, and I understand from her statement it wasn't what she meant to say.
In her statement, Amelia Davidson says she won't be commenting further at this time. Parliament returns tomorrow, though. She'll find it hard to escape further questioning then.
And that was our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch, reporting. It is 12 minutes after 5. Kia ora tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Calls tonight for a blanket ban on caged eggs. The animal welfare group SAFE is delivering a petition with more than 30,000 signatures to Parliament this week. Battery hen cages have been banned since January this year, but the petition wants larger colony cages outlawed too. Emma Brodie from SAFE joins us now. Kia ora, Emma. Can you just start off by briefly talking us through the difference between, battery cages and colony cages?
Yeah, definitely. So battery cages were tiny. They could hold about 5 hens each, and they were completely barren. Colony cages are much larger, and they've added what the industry calls enrichments, which includes metal perches, a scratch pad, and 1 nesting area per cage. But the problem is that in a colony system, there are around 60 birds in each cage. So 60 birds competing to access those enrichments, competing to access food and water. It's an incredibly stressful living environment for them. And because it's still so overcrowded, it doesn't address the welfare issues that are inherent to any cage farming system.
But they're better than battery cages, would you agree?
No, it's not good enough. It's not good enough for the hens.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying about it not being good enough, but are the colony cages better than battery cages?
No, they're not. They're just as overcrowded and they're just as harmful to the health and welfare of hens.
Getting rid of them, what do you think that would do to the price of eggs? We're in a cost of living crisis at the moment. Eggs are popular, high quality protein, right? That is relatively affordable. What would it do to the price?
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, we have to look at the fact that all food prices have gone up, and there's a lot of factors at play there. Like the war in Ukraine, for example, has driven up the cost of grain and animal feed. So it's not just this ban on battery cages that have driven up the cost of eggs. And we understand people's concerns, but actually all major supermarkets have already committed to being cage-free within the next few years, as well as most major food service groups. So phasing out colony cages shouldn't actually affect supply to major supermarkets.
So given that the main supermarkets have all put an end date on when they will continue to sell caged eggs, what is the issue? Because why not just leave it up to the consumer to decide? If there is no demand, production will stop. If you can't sell them.
Yeah, well, our issue is that these systems don't actually comply with New Zealand's own animal welfare laws. The Animal Welfare Act states that animals must have the opportunity to display normal patterns of behaviour, and that's impossible for hens confined in a colony cage. So government should actually be leading the way ahead of big businesses, ahead of food service groups, and in line with international policy as well.
But colony cages are legal in this country.
They're legal through the Code of Welfare for Hens, but they're not consistent with the basic welfare provisions in the Animal Welfare Act.
So if you think they're cruel and should be phased out, why do you think people still buy them?
Well, an independent poll that SAFE did told us that 76% of Kiwis do want to see cages phased out. And over 36,000 people have signed SAFE's petition in support of freeing hens from cages. So I'd say overwhelmingly New Zealanders want to see hens live a better life in New Zealand.
They might want to see it on paper, but do you think they want to see it in reality? Because the argument from producers is it will be more expensive, and conversion to different types of egg production is costing millions. So while people might tick a box saying that that's what they want, do they actually want to pay the price for it? What do you know about that?
Yeah, most New Zealanders are already opting for what they perceive to be higher welfare products by choosing things like free-range eggs. And back in 2020, our own Agriculture Minister, Damien O'Connor, said that he wouldn't be investing in colony systems, and that wasn't a smart investment because that's not the way the world is going. So we're just looking for government to step up and take the welfare of hens seriously by just banning cages once and for all.
But again, don't we go back to my original question about consumer demand? If you say people are ticking a box saying they don't want it, fewer people are buying it, there'll be no market and it'll just go, won't it?
Well, we think that government should be leading the way and ensuring that our regulations, our animal welfare regulations, are consistent with our own Animal Welfare Act. That's government's responsibility, and they should be leading the way, not the market.
In terms of export, a number of overseas countries don't allow colony cages, right?
Yeah, that's right. They are being phased out around the world.
So again, then there's a disappearing market for any eggs that are produced in this way, isn't there, logically?
But if we continue to produce them, that's also a huge risk to New Zealand's international reputation as an ethical and sustainable supplier of agricultural products. We've got an international reputation to uphold for good animal welfare, so this should be a no-brainer.
Good to talk to you, Emma. Thank you for joining us. That is Emma Brodie, who is SAFE's campaign manager there. They want to outlaw all egg production in cages, and that includes colony cages, which, as Emma said, are slightly bigger, but they still query the welfare conditions for hens there. We're keen for your feedback on that one. You can text us on 2101 or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Do you want to see cages go? Are you prepared to pay more for eggs in order for that to happen? Let us know your thoughts. The east coast of the Coromandel remains largely cut off from the rest of the country, with access in and out severely impacted by the summer's cyclones. A fix for the biggest slip in the region on State Highway 25A won't be finished before Christmas, but engineers are drawing closer to making a decision on the best path forward. Reporter Tom Taylor and camera operator Nick Monroe have the story.
A rare glimpse into the cavernous divides that's effectively split the Coromandel Peninsula in two. 2 months ago, a major landslide took out the key route of State Highway 25A. The site's been cleared of much of the initial debris and now resembles a quarry. Media were taken there today. We were reminded of the dangers that linger under the surface and given strict instructions to stick to the paths carved out, unless we want to sink waist deep into a quicksand-like substance. As to what will become of this route, that answer may yet take another 2 months. For now, Waka Kotahi Regional Manager of Infrastructure Delivery, Joe Wilton, says there are 3 options on the table.
The 3 options are reinstate the road, either using some form of retaining, a bridge option, and then bypass, which is where we'd look at going round the slip up in the hill.
At this point, Ms Wilton says engineers aren't leaning towards any one of these options, with that choice reliant on the outcome of their geotechnical investigations. She won't categorically rule out the outlying 4th possibility of a tunnel through the mountains. But she does point to the cost of this being a prohibitive factor.
We can't say that tunnelling is completely off the table, but with tunnelling, that is quite an expensive option. You also need to really look at the geotech to see what you're hitting when you're tunnelling, because you can't see when you're tunnelling blind.
Once the best option for the road is selected in May, further design work will need to take place before construction begins. It means the start date could fall into the wetter winter months, less than desirable for a project on such unstable ground.
A lot of the material we're finding is kind of clay stuff, and so when water hits that, it goes very much like plasticine and gets very sticky, and that is quite challenging to work with in winter, so that's a consideration. Whereas there are other methods, say building structures, which can progress in winter, albeit a little bit slowly depending on the weather, because obviously if we get torrential rain, it becomes unsafe to work.
We're here in the heart of the slip on Coromandel's State Highway 25A, now a mass of pits 30 metres deep and 140 metres across. Now engineers are working around the clock to find a viable solution for this road, but with Waka Kotahi saying that any fix is going to take 9 to 12 months, those looking for a solution by Christmas are going to be disappointed.
The project's lead geotech engineer, Nathan McKenzie, says his team's about 2/3 of the way through their investigations. They've already drilled 10 boreholes and are working on the 11th and 12th now, aiming to find rocks or soil stable enough to support the weight of a new structure without the risk of further slips.
We're expecting the geotech investigations to be substantially complete this week, and from then on we'll be looking to start assessing and working out, basically refining options using that information.
Using the data collected, they'll build a full model of the site, which Mr McKenzie says should provide a clearer picture of what's needed. After that, the criteria for a decision becomes relatively simple.
We are looking at cost, we're looking at something that has to work, something has to meet design standards, and we're also looking at something that can be done fast.
Speed, without doubt, an important factor for many residents and businesses cut off by the slip and fearing the loss of another summer's trade. Meanwhile, another slip on the eastern side of the Coromandel, between Whangamata and Tairua, also giving cause for concern. A large chunk taken out of the road has seen this section of State Highway 25 reduced to a single lane for light vehicles only. With the rebuild only due to start in April, Easter holiday makers looking for a relaxing time at the peninsula's beaches may face a testing drive to get there.
It is 21 minutes after 5, and if you are listening to that story on radio, there is a video version. It'll be on our webpage, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we're interested in your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. You can get in touch via text 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoints@rnz.co.nz. Let us know your thoughts on the call for Marama Davidson to resign her ministerial position after making comments about white cis men and violence. And also interested to hear thoughts on eggs, whether all caged eggs should be banned, and are you prepared to pay for the change? Let us know. 2101 on text. It is time to go to the headlines now. Mark is standing by. Ko Mark anō tēnei.
Kia ora, Lisa. The Greens co-leader says she misspoke when she was filmed blaming white men for violence during a confrontation with a far-right activist. Marama Davidson says she was in shock after being struck by a motorcyclist at anti-transgender activist Posey Parker's rally in Auckland at the weekend. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says her comments were not appropriate. Meanwhile, Mr Hipkins says letting Posey Parker into the country was the right decision, but the right to free speech does not extend to physical violence. Parker was doused with tomato juice and left the country early, cancelling a Wellington appearance. Detective Inspector Scott Beard, who led the Grace Millane murder investigation, says the failure of her killer, Jessie Kempson, to have convictions for sexual violence on 2 other women dismissed will be a relief for the victims. The Court of Appeal says neither sentence contained any errors of law. And the High Court has ruled that the families of the 29 men who died in the Pike River mine explosion can have access to privileged material that led to charges against the mine's former chief executive, Peter Whittle, being dropped. A former ombudsman and advocate for the families, Leo Donnelly, says the ruling opens up the argument that there should be disclosure of information to reassure people. And protesters are taking to Queenstown streets in about an hour, around 6:30, to demand action over the rental housing crisis. Co-organiser Hannah Sullivan says people are living in cars, hostels, tents and couch surfing. It is just on 24 minutes past 5, and I'll have more headlines at 20 to 6 and, of course, a full bulletin at 6 o'clock.
Kia ora rā e hoa. It's time to get to our sports news now. And White Fern star Amelia Kerr has won cricket's inaugural Women's Indian Premier League title with the Mumbai Indians. The all-rounder played a big part in the 7-wicket win over the Delhi Capitals in front of nearly 20,000 fans. And we're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. Felicity, what does it mean for Amelia Kerr to be part of this win? What does it do for her cricket credentials?
Well, it certainly doesn't hurt her chances of getting another contract. This is seen as one of the premier competitions for women. It's obviously in its first year, but when it first came around, it was really seen as a big opportunity, not only for them playing, but also for the type of money that they can pick up from this competition. So the 22-year-old was actually only one of 2 New Zealanders who were picked up for this competition, the other being the White Ferns captain, Sophie Devine. So to be involved in a final, that's a pretty big deal, and it keeps her in the minds of like the coaches and the owners when it comes around to that player auction again. When she was picked up for this competition, it was just under 200,000. So you'd imagine she'd be able to sort of up her prices. She was among one of the top wicket takers in the competition and among one of the top MVP. They sort of have a point system as well for the all-rounders, that she's among that as well. And so she also today took 2 wickets and was unbeaten on 14 runs, which is quite a valuable contribution in this T20 game. She may be slightly overshadowed by England's Nat Shiva-Brunt, who scored 60, and also the other international in that team, the West Indians, Hayley Matthews. She also took 3 wickets. So she's amongst good company, shall we say, in this kind of competition and in this team, because the Women's Premier League is actually only second to the WNBA, so the basketball competition in the States, in terms of the type of money that these women can actually pick up. So for her, she wants to be around again once they bring around the auctions for this next season of the Premier League, and her doing well probably helps some other White Ferns who did actually miss out on picking up contracts. It sort of shows the type of things that New Zealanders can do.
And the men's IPL, which starts this week, has drained the Black Cats of some talent for the upcoming T20 international.
Yeah, the 2 squads for the T20s, home T20s against Sri Lanka and the away series against Pakistan were named today. So Tom Latham comes back to captain both of those sides. He hasn't played in a T20 game since 2021. But the reason he's getting that is because of those New Zealand players who are in the IPL. So that's the likes of Tim Southee, Kane Williamson, Mitch Santner, Glenn Phillips, Stephen Conway, Finn Allen, Michael Bracewell, Lockie Ferguson. They all are part of the IPL, which starts on Saturday. So that gives the likes of Tom Latham the opportunity to lead what is a pretty new look, younger, less experienced side for these T20s. And it also gives, for the T20s here, Coach Gary Stead will be in control. But once they head across to Pakistan, he's taking a bit of a break. He's interestingly said last week that going forward, perhaps New Zealand should have different coaches for the different formats, because he says it's not just the players that kind of get tired with this kind of packed cricket schedule that's around now. So he's also going to take a little bit of a break. He will be back for the ODIs against Pakistan as well. But while he's out, it's the bowling coach, Shane Jurgensen, who takes over as the head of the coaching panel. And just also one person who missed out on an IPL contract, Jimmy Neesham. He actually comes back for these T20s. So while those players are off in the IPL, he's actually back in New Zealand. He missed out, chose to turn down a New Zealand Central contract to take up those T20 league things. And that's what he's been doing. He's been playing in the Pakistan Super League and in South Africa as well. So maybe missing out on the IPL turned out well for him to be able to get some time for New Zealand.
Thank you, Felicity Reid there. Bar and restaurant owners in Wellington, Te Whanganui-a-Tara, say they're hanging on to business by the skin of their teeth. They're blaming the usual suspects, the pandemic, cost of living, interest rates, supply costs and labour shortages, but also say that Wellington City Council needs to do more to ensure their survival. Their mayor admits things need to change. Our reporter Lauren Crimp has more.
In the capital's CBD, reviews of its nightlife probably equate to 3.5 stars on TripAdvisor.
Tragic. Courtney Place is grim. There's no good places for our age group, older age group. Youth have destroyed it.
It's probably like the better nightlifes in New Zealand. I always have a good time when I'm out.
Cool restaurants, cool cocktail bars. After work drinks are always really good.
Some spots have closed that I miss, but there's always something that's open, something that's happening. Anytime I'm walking through town at night, it always seems pretty busy.
Right now, ever since the pandemic, everything's opening up and I think it's getting busier now.
I think it's okay in certain areas, but Courtney Place is trash. When I went there on Saturday night, it really changed the vibe of the evening and just sort of turned a little bit slimy.
Those behind the bars are struggling. Hospitality New Zealand board member and bar owner Jeremy Smith warns of a domino effect.
We can't have too many more empty shops or businesses along Courtney Place or even other streets in Wellington. As soon as too many of those pop up, you start ending up finding it quite difficult to keep the vibrancy going.
He says many businesses are just hanging on, but he's convinced Wellington's hospo heartbeat will remain strong. But Sean Golding, owner of 5 establishments, from a dive bar to high-end restaurants, isn't so positive.
It's pretty depressing, to be honest. I don't think I've felt this disheartened about the city and how shabby it is for such a long time. It just feels like it needs a clean and it needs some pride put back into it.
Sean Golding says the council holds the key to the industry's success. He wants it to clean up the streets, better understand their needs and make consenting and licensing easier. And a big one, ensure the capital is affordable for students who are choosing other cities for their studies.
That's a huge workforce for us, not to mention their disposable income when they go out at night and they spend a bit of money. That all contributes, but they've got nowhere to live.
He says hospitality has been let down by a series of disinterested mayors and they're pinning their hopes on Tory whānau. She says she hears them. As an inner-city dweller who frequents local bars and restaurants, she's the woman for the job, and things will soon change.
I do know things have been a bit tough lately, and our council has a part to play in that, especially along Courtney Place and, of course, Cuba, where it's becoming quite pricey to even have a bar there.
Tory whānau says she'll push council to strip back the bureaucracy bar and restaurant owners face.
The biggest issue that I'm hearing from our bar owners is the licensing and consenting process. We need to make it a lot easier. So I'm going to work with council officers to see what we can do, make it more streamlined, make it a bit quicker, so we can kind of get those bars up and running.
Tory whānau says the paperwork has just been signed for a fresh council role of city manager, who will work with bars and restaurants to make consents more accessible. She says council is amping up its event strategy to bring more people into the capital and working on better housing and public transport options so the city is once again attractive to cash-strapped students.
Lauren Crimp reporting. It is 29 minutes to 6. Kia ora tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's time for the business news now. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Nona Peltier, who joins me live in the studio to talk all things business. Let's start with Synlait Milk. First half-year result, disappointing.
Yeah, not really a surprise. They sort of flagged last week that their full-year result was going to be well short of the mark, and their plan to transform the business was going to take a whole year longer. That was last week, so that was talking about the full-year result. This is the half-year, so their net profit was $4.8 million. That compares with $27.9 the year earlier, although that did include a one-time bonus of nearly $12 million. It was a gain on some property that they'd leased back in Auckland. So overall, though, the market wasn't too impressed. Part of the reason for their difficult trading is they had adopted some new software, but the implementation didn't go very well, so that ended up with poor sales, etc. Then on top of that, higher labor market costs, higher input costs because of milk powder and so on, more expensive. And then on top of that, there was other cost inflation. So overall, not great for the company. Surely the market didn't like it very much. Share price was marked down 5.5% today.
Okay.
So there you go.
Mortgaged households, they're going to face higher loan repayments. Tell us more.
Okay, so that's not new. We've been talking about that for some time.
These are the people coming off fixed, are they?
Yes. So CoreLogic, which is a property research company, they do economic research on property. They said that, so they've done some calculations and they figured that if you had currently a mortgage rate of, say, 4%, you're going to have to renew it coming up this year sometime because a lot of people go for 1-year terms. 4% is the newer increased rate. A lot of people are still on 2, 2.5, 3, that kind of the order of those sort of very low mortgage interest rates. If they had to renegotiate a 4% mortgage, say $500,000 at 6.5%, that's going to cost them about $9,250 extra a year in interest payments. That's over and above what they're already paying.
Yep.
So you take that kind of money out of somebody's household budget, and that's not the biggest jump, right? There's still going to be people with even larger jumps than that and bigger mortgages. So it's going to be tough. The thing that's holding the market together, I suppose, is that people still have jobs, so they're not desperate to sell. However, there are some signs that people are starting to miss those mortgage payments. The Reserve Bank does allow banks to offer interest-only repayments. That's going to ease the burden. The main thing is, though, if you have a job, try and hang on to it because that's going to keep you in a good position. Compared with what the alternative would be, seeing as there's going to be fewer jobs created. That's the forecast for this year. So,
and Nona, what news do you have of the markets, please?
Well, look, overall, we did pretty good today. Overall, the Asian markets were a bit sluggish. There's a lot of jitters around the world about the stability of banks, especially smaller ones in the United States. So the NZX Top 50 Index, it rose 0.25%, almost about that. 32 points up to 11,613. The New Zealand dollar at 62.1 US cents, 93.2 Australian, 50.7 British pence.
Thank you, Nona. We always like to get your reckons on a few things. So before you go, Feijoas, love or hate them?
Actually, I quite like them.
All right.
I love the smell of them.
Okay, keep listening because later in the show we've got something about Feijoas. Thank you, Nona. Nona Peltier there with news and the fruit and veg report too. On to something completely different. The father of one of the 29 men who died in the Pike River mine hopes a High Court decision will change the justice system. Bernie Monk believes there's an abuse of legal privilege and he wants to see it stopped. The High Court has ruled families may now see the privileged material that led to the decision to drop charges against mine boss Peter Whittle. Rachel Graham has more.
Bernie Monk, whose son Michael died in the disaster, says for 10 years they have fought for truth and accountability, and he believes the decision by Justice Gillian Mallon has taken them a big step forward.
She's changed the course of justice and will stop people from using legal privilege. And another word that they use is in the best interest of the country to get transparency and the truth. So I think she's going to change the way that that's going to be done and will change the whole justice system around what we've been going through over the last 10 years.
In her decision, Justice Mallon said she considered that transparency, through open justice, outweighs factors pointing against disclosure of the documents, which are claimed to be privileged. She said transparency is in the interest of justice, as without it, there is scope for false speculation and misunderstanding, which can undermine confidence in the administration of justice. The court action was taken by Chris Harder with the support of Bernie Monk and Dean Dunbar, whose 17-year-old son Joseph also died in the mine. Mr Monk says they hope by taking this action they can help others who might have to face similar issues in the future.
It's easy to say truth and it's easy to say accountability, but when you actually got to get to that point, it hasn't been easy. It's a game, and it's a game that we're going to ferociously attack.
Former Ombudsman and an advocate for the families, Leo Donnelly, says the balance previously always sat with legal privilege, but this tips it the other way.
Because it's opened up the argument that confidence in the administration of justice means that you should have disclosure, not just to show that something wrong happened, but also that you should have disclosure so that people be confident to see that nothing untoward did happen, which was a much wider argument.
WorkSafe has been approached for comment. Sonia Rockhouse, whose son Ben died in the mine, didn't want to comment on the High Court's decision and said she didn't think it changed the situation a great deal from when she and Anna Osborne took a case against WorkSafe to the Supreme Court in 2017. At that time, the Supreme Court ruled that WorkSafe's decision to withdraw its prosecution of Pike River mine boss Peter Whittle in exchange for payments to the victims' families was unlawful. Sonia Rockhouse said her focus is on the police prosecution case, which has been collecting evidence in the mine drift. Mr Monk says they are now awaiting a date to travel to Wellington, where they will get to view and listen to the previously privileged information.
It is 22 minutes to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let's get to some of your feedback now. A number of you getting in touch on Marama Davidson, and this is her comments on so-called cis men, white men, being connected to violence, responsible for it. This person says, at times of stress and shock, this is when you see the mask break and their true self come out. That's what Dean thinks. Shirley's got in touch to say, for Acton National to condemn Marama for saying what she did quite honestly makes me furious. What hypocrites they are. I can't remember one case where Jacinda Ardern asked for a national member to resign, and she sure had lots of opportunities. It's pathetic, that listener says. And Francis says, regarding Marama's comments, when kids at school come out with nasty comments, then declare it was an accident, I remind them that if it's on their lips, it's in their hearts and in their minds. On the subject of eggs and whether all caged eggs should go, including colony eggs, this person says colony eggs, horse racing, greyhound racing should all go. Ruby says absolutely want to see all cages go. It is not enough that those poor chooks give their lives for our appetites, but also have to suffer miserably without any thought. Ban the lot and give the birds some degree of kindness. Better yet, says Ruby, give eggs up. We would love to hear your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. You can get in touch via text. That's on 2101. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time for us to go to the headlines. Anea Mark, mina pita pita kōrero.
Kia ora. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says Marama Davidson's comments about race weren't helpful. During a heated exchange with a far-right activist in Auckland over the weekend, the Greens co-leader was filmed saying white cis men are responsible for violence. Ms Davidson has since acknowledged she should have made it clear that violence occurs in every community. Jesse Kempson, who murdered British backpacker Grace Millane, has lost an appeal to have convictions for raping a woman he met on Tinder and sexually assaulting a former partner dismissed. Detective Inspector Scott Beard, who led the Grace Millane investigation, says he expects the Court of Appeal's decision will be reassuring for Kempson's victims. WorkSafe has been notified after a fatal workplace accident in Manawatu Whanganui district this afternoon. Emergency services were called to Mangamahu, a remote farming and forest area of State Highway 4, and that was shortly before midday. The government is introducing legislation to redirect child support money collected by Inland Revenue to solo parents on a benefit. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says more than 41,000 solo parent families will gain a median $24 per week. And Colombia's Chief of Police, General Henry Sanabria, says he and other officers have used exorcism and prayer to track down some most wanted criminals, claiming it overcomes the witchcraft they use to protect themselves. His comments have sparked a lively debate on social media. Those are the headlines. I'll have a full bulletin for you at 6.
Thanks, Mark. In the US, recovery efforts continue after violent and powerful tornadoes swept through southern states, killing 26 people. A state of emergency was declared in Georgia after a tornado struck outside Atlanta. In neighbouring Alabama and Mississippi, there's been widespread devastation and hundreds of people displaced. Ivan Rodriguez is in Rolling Fork, Mississippi, with the latest.
The resources that the people here in Rolling Fork and throughout Mississippi need, the help is on the way.
On Sunday, cleanup and recovery efforts continue in hard-hit Rolling Fork, Mississippi, after a powerful tornado flattened much of the community late Friday night.
What we've seen over the last 36 hours in Mississippi, on the one hand, has been heartbreaking to see the loss and devastation of these communities, but on the other hand, has been inspiring and gives me great reason for optimism.
At least 10 confirmed tornadoes struck Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee. And while search and rescue operations are still ongoing, President Joe Biden approved a disaster declaration for the hardest hit parts of Mississippi.
To the people of Mississippi, that we are here not just today, but for the long haul.
We are going to work with the team, with the state team here, to assess additional counties to see if any more need to be added to this declaration.
In Georgia, a large and extremely dangerous tornado struck south of LaGrange Sunday morning.
Some of the members of our church have had some injuries. Their homes were torn up, but there are no fatalities. Something to be thankful for.
You can see the aftermath of the destruction the storm left behind. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp declared a state of emergency. Meanwhile, in Rolling Fork, residents are bracing for the possibility of more severe storms as they face a long road to recovery.
NATO is condemning Moscow as dangerous and irresponsible after Russia announced tactical nuclear weapons will be stationed in Belarus. Belarus shares a long border with Ukraine as well as with NATO members Poland, Lithuania and Latvia. Officials from the military alliance are accusing Moscow of constantly breaking its nuclear arms control commitments. The ABC's Isabella Higgins reports.
Russian President Vladimir Putin says his country will soon station tactical nuclear weapons in neighbouring Belarus, a close ally of the Kremlin. The former Soviet state shares a border with Ukraine and several NATO member states, including Latvia, Lithuania and Poland. Russian President Vladimir Putin told state TV he's working closely with the Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko.
Alexander Lukashenko says, listen, we're your closest allies. Why do the Americans deploy nuclear weapons to their allies on their territory, train the crews, the pilots in how to use this type of weapon if needed? So we agreed that we will do the same.
Russia says it has stationed 10 aircraft and transferred the Iskander missile system to carry and launch nuclear weapons. President Putin says Moscow is not handing control of the arms to Minsk and claims the move does not breach non-proliferation treaties.
We will do this without violating our obligations. I emphasise without violating our international obligations on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons.
NATO has now condemned President Putin's irresponsible and dangerous rhetoric around nuclear weapons. In a statement, NATO officials knocked back suggestions member states were breaching international agreements, but accused the Kremlin of constantly failing to meet their nuclear control commitments. US officials have downplayed the threat from Moscow and say there's no need to change their own nuclear strategic position.
I can tell you that we've seen nothing that would indicate Mr. Putin is preparing to use tactical nuclear weapons in any way whatsoever in Ukraine. And I can also tell you that we haven't seen anything that would cause us to change our own strategic nuclear deterrent posture.
Ukraine is calling for a meeting of the UN Security Council to discuss Moscow's actions, while leaders in Lithuania are calling for new sanctions. Many analysts insist Russia's latest move is designed to intimidate and threaten, but won't change the outcome of the war in Ukraine.
Back home, and police are continuing to search around Petone Beach, where a shoe with a foot inside was found on Saturday. Crystal Gibbons spoke to some locals.
Julie was down by the wharf the day the foot was found. Today, we found her much closer to the footpath.
I am actually feeling quite disturbed about it because, you know, we bring our kids down here. You're not sure whether or not you're going to find the other one. I mean, we could, and that would be pretty awful, wouldn't it?
Helen from the nearby cafe says she's found it quite scary. especially as she starts work early in the morning.
It is frightening, just knowing what's been going on, and just seeing the boat out there this morning, it brings it closer to home as to what is happening in the society. It's not good.
Meanwhile, Renee is hoping that answers will be found soon.
It's something that will always play on my mind whenever I'm there. And yeah, as I drive past, it was the first thing I thought about driving to work this morning. It's just, my heart goes out to whoever was involved, and hopefully, it's not any ill intent behind it or anything.
Police are expected to run forensics on the foot to get formal identification. Meanwhile, their search of the beach has yet to turn up anything of interest.
And that was Crystal Gibbons reporting. It is 12 minutes to 6. Kia ora tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Love them or loathe them, the Feijoa season is upon us, and buyers are being warned the fruit might be a little bit banged up this season thanks to the extreme weather. Some fruit and veggie crops were decimated in January floods and Cyclone Gabrielle, but Feijoas are still in good supply. And joining us now is Ian Turk from the Feijoa Growers Association. Kia ora, Ian. How are the fruit looking this year compared to what maybe they look like in previous years?
Yeah, well, the fruit is starting to come out of Gisborne now, and reports are we've got plenty of good quality, good tasting fruit. So that's all good for all the consumers. Your earlier comment about the fruit being a bit banged up, there may well be some fruit that's been a bit windblown on trees, and some markings from just the weather that we've had over the last few years. So, if you do see a bit of fruit in the supermarket that's just got a few marks on it, don't worry about the taste or the quality inside, and think about the growers. It's always good to support those, because there's certainly some growers doing it tough at the moment.
So, Ian, are you saying it's what's on the inside that matters?
Exactly right. Yep. I do know of one or two people who will eat the skin, but they're very few.
Because shoppers do have a bit of a funny attitude to fruit and veg that kind of doesn't look like it came out of a photo shoot sometimes, right?
Yeah, that's right. And, I think when was it, hailstorms a couple of years ago, we had Stormy Fruit brand, which was hailmark fruit. And, the ugly fruit brand, I'm sure everyone knows. And it's good quality fruit. There's no reason to not eat it and enjoy it.
Any change in price because of maybe a slightly different outer appearance?
Yeah, it'll probably go up because everyone wants to support the growers that have been hit by the weather.
What's a kilo worth right now, roundabout?
Oh, look, this time of the season is not good. I've heard reports that some of the very early fruit was in the supermarket at $19 a kilogram. But
what?
Give it a week or two, it'd be down round about $6, $7 a kilogram.
Do you reckon that's where it will settle?
Oh, I think that's where it should settle. Looking at past seasons.
So they are still in really good supply, and I find this interesting because quite a few crops really got hammered, right? And you talk about Gisborne, that was a district that had extreme weather. So how come you've still got a really good supply? What saved them?
Well, we have... We certainly have some growers, and I know a couple that just won't pick this year because we're hit in some of the worst areas out of Napier Hastings. But there's also, you might recall that, a few days after Gabriel went through, apples were being harvested and picked. So there are orchards within those areas that weren't flooded, don't have silt problems. That's not decrying that they had weather issues, and there will be tree damage and shelter belt damage and fruit quality issues. But there is still a crop coming out of these regions, and Feijoas are grown from top of the South Island right through to Northland. So we've got orchards that are not in the affected areas as well.
So basically, geographic diversity might have saved the crop.
That certainly helped us. Yep. So Gisborne's coming on stream at the moment, but we'll move into the Waikato and head on down south over the next few weeks.
Are they a big export?
No, we don't export many at all. Some get exported at the moment, mainly to Australia, but only a small amount. They have a very short shelf life, so that means they've got to be air freighted, which pushes the cost up tremendously.
Ian, you are probably acutely aware of the fact that Feijoas are quite polarising. Would you agree?
No.
You don't
they
think
seem
so?
to be. They definitely seem to be, don't they?
Yeah, some people reckon they smell a bit funky. You know, it's even been mentioned maybe, like, I'm going to say it, just put it out there, like pee. What do you think?
Like what, sorry?
Pee.
Pee?
As in wheeze.
No, not at all. I've never heard that, and I've been in the Feijoa industry for a long time. It must be one that was very old.
Okay, Ian, let's have your best pitch for an alternative recipe, because I see that Feijoa nachos are a thing.
I was just going to say Feijoa nachos, and it sounds odd, doesn't it? But Feijoas are a South American fruit, so you know, fit them in with nachos. That's the recipe that I've seen on the 5 Plus a Day website, and I'm going to try it this year with a bit of Feijoa salsa on the side. So how's that?
Yeah, sounds great. What would be your normal favourite go-to for a Feijoa recipe?
Oh, well, no recipe, just
straight up.
Halve it and scoop it out and eat it.
Sounds
then go on to
fantastic.
the next one.
I'm biased. I love them. Thank you, Ian. Really appreciate your time. That's Ian Turk from the Feijoa Growers Association. Whoa, that's pretty hardcore, $19 a kilo at the moment. Let's hope they settle where he says they will. All Australian states except Tasmania are now held by Labor governments after the Liberal Party's loss in New South Wales over the weekend. Many inside the Liberal Party are worried that the New South Wales result is an indication of a party in decline, and debate is growing on whether revival lies in lurching to the left or to the right. The ABC's Alison Shaw reports.
Malcolm Turnbull isn't one for holding back his opinions, and not surprisingly, the former Prime Minister has won on the New South Wales election. But he says before any fingers are pointed, credit must be given where credit is due.
I don't think the Liberal Party should feel, that they've been thrown out in disgrace or anything like that. But there is no doubt that the brand is suffering, and it is seen by many people, many younger people, and when I say younger, I mean sort of people under 50, and by women more so than men, as not representing them any longer. And that, of course, was why you had the big Teal, success at the federal election.
The New South Wales results has again clearly illuminated the left-right fault line that is running down the Liberal Party.
Well, the moderates are a very beleaguered, species within the Liberal Party nowadays. They're still quite influential in New South Wales. From the federal party room, they've been absolutely reduced to a slither. Increasingly, the Liberal Party's agenda is being driven by right-wing media.
On the other side of the Liberal Party's ideological divide sits people like former New South Wales Cabinet Minister David Elliott. In an opinion piece for Sydney's Daily Telegraph, a News Corporation publication, he says the party is failing because it's effectively trying to please everyone, from progressive, climate-oriented voters in wealthy inner-city suburbs to more conservative-minded voters in the outer metro areas in places like Western Sydney. Liberal elder and former deputy leader of the New South Wales Liberal Party, Bruce Baird, comes from a more progressive wing of the party. He agrees, though, that the party needs to choose a path and stick to it.
It's somewhat a party divided at the moment. You've got the moderates and the right wing, and the split's getting somewhat wider between the two. And I think it needs to be coming together and recognising what are the key issues that people are concerned about, and especially in the city seats. And as people are becoming more progressive in their views on climate change, on gender balance and so on. But, at the same time, there are traditional values that the Liberal Party stands for in terms of fiscal conservatism and the way they handle the budget, etc. So I think there's a realisation if they want to win elections, they've got to change in terms of the policy.
it's a tough choice, and whatever the Liberal Party goes with, it's sure to alienate a section of the community. Someone with direct experience of the consequences of what can happen when the party is caught in that dilemma is Dave Sharma. The former Liberal MP representing Wentworth lost his seat to independent Allegra Spender at the last federal election.
Clearly our brand needs some work and our structures need some work and our machinery needs some work, and this is the time that we need to be doing that. We're failing to make a sufficiently strong generational appeal to millennial voters and Gen X voters as well, so that sort of, people under 55 or thereabouts.
In practical terms, the next step for the New South Wales Liberal Party is to search for a new leader. That shouldn't take too long, but what might be a longer pursuit is the search for its political soul.
Let's get to some of your feedback now, a lot of it on Marama Davidson's comments. This person says Marama should stand down after her racist remark about white men. It has not helped their cause at all, just rent a mob, says Gary. Another person says it would be nice to think that Marama Davidson will now be similarly forgiving when an opposition white male MP next trips up in the heat of the moment. I hope that she will be forgiving because what she said was racist and absolutely unacceptable. On the other hand, this listener says no need whatsoever for Marama Davidson to resign. She was being harassed and provoked by live streamers allied with the bullies who'd just knocked her over on the pedestrian crossing. It is admirable that she kept her cool to the degree that she did. On the subject of chooks and eggs, colony eggs as they've called, but they're in essence caged eggs, just bigger cages than battery eggs. This person says, my husband came home with fresh colony eggs. When I asked why he didn't have free range, which I always buy, he said they were the cheapest. He had understood that there were no longer caged hens and assumed that colony eggs meant they weren't confined in any way. I believe consumers would make the choice for cage-free, but they need to know what colony hens means for the birds. That's Kim from Wellington. Karen says it's not just what people buy directly, but it's what producers of baked goods, cafes and restaurants, etc. choose to buy. Choices that are hidden from the consumer, she says. Ian says this rubbish about cage versus free-range chickens is privileged woke anthropomorphism, which is stealing a protein source from our less well-off families. Stop it and face the reality. Ian says no doubt it will move the problem offshore and will import cheap eggs.
RNZ News at 6. Kia Ora, I'm Mark Leishman. The Prime Minister's office has asked the Greens co-leader to clarify her comments about white cis men being responsible for violence. A cisgender person is someone whose gender corresponds with their sex at birth. Marama Davidson, who is also the Minister for the Prevention of Family and Sexual Violence, made the remarks during a heated exchange with a far-right activist. She's since acknowledged she misspoke and says she should have made clear that violence occurs in every community. Chris Hipkins says the Minister's comments were inappropriate.
Well, I, through my office, made it clear to her that I think it would be beneficial if she was able to clarify what it was she was intending to say. My understanding is that it had already been conveyed to me and to my office that the words that she had used were not what she was intending to say.
Chris Hipkins says Marama Davidson's comments about race weren't helpful. An advocate for the families of two men who died in the Pike River mine disaster says a High Court decision shows the importance of confidence in the justice system over legal privilege. The court decided the families can see privileged material, which led to WorkSafe dropping charges against the mine's chief executive, Peter Whittle. A former ombudsman and advocate for the families, Leo Donnelly, says the balance previously always sat with legal privilege, but today's ruling tips it the other way. The families are now making arrangements to see the material. Auditors have again warned schools about excessive spending on hospitality and expensive gifts for departing staff. The annual report on school audits says many schools are not budgeting properly. Our education correspondent, John Gerritsen, has the details.
The Auditor General's report covers the audits of schools' 2021 accounts and is several months late due to COVID-related delays last year. It says more schools recorded deficits in 2021, but other financial indicators such as cash in the bank improved. The report says 19 schools were in financial difficulty in 2021 and auditors were worried about 40 others. It says 1 in 5 schools did not have a reliable plan for building maintenance, which is a long-standing problem, and nearly 500 had not prepared a proper budget.
The government is introducing legislation to redirect child support money collected by Inland Revenue to solo parents on a benefit. Child support payments are currently taken by the government and used to offset the cost of the benefit paid to the parents. A bill to divert the money to solo parents has now been introduced to Parliament. The government says more than 41,000 sole parent families will gain a median of $24 a week. A support group for survivors of abuse within the Catholic Church has sent an open letter to the Pope claiming a cover-up, secrecy and denial of abuse by the Church in this country. The Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, SNAP, says the Church's redress process is secretive and because of that denies a survivor's right to natural justice.
SNAP says it wrote to Pope Francis in September but never got a reply, which it says is disappointing. It's calling on him to instruct church leaders in New Zealand to initiate an urgent, independent and transparent audit of its redress system. SNAP says abusers remain in ministry, children remain at risk and the church continues to be brought into disrepute. The Catholic Church says it's regularly reviewing protocols and practices.
That was Andrew McRae reporting. The Health and Disability Commissioner says Auckland City Hospital breached the Code of Consumer Rights when a patient with throat cancer suffered irreversible brain damage from a morphine overdose. Deputy Commissioner Vanessa Caldwell says the hospital's policy on the use of morphine, 2019, were not clear enough to support safe practices. She says the nurse responsible for checking on the injections was also working overtime and failed to complete vital checks. The case could be referred to the Human Rights Review Tribunal. It is now 6:04. The co-organiser of a Queenstown housing protest says people are living in cars, hostels, tents and couch surfing because of a chronic lack of accommodation. Protesters are meeting tonight to discuss what action they can take. Hannah Sullivan says the situation is unacceptable. Israeli President Yitzhak Herzog is calling on the government to stop a controversial judicial overhaul legislation process immediately. It follows the sacking of the Defence Minister by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu after Yoav Gallant called for a pause to plans to reform the court system. Under the proposed changes, the government would have control over the appointment of judges and Parliament could override Supreme Court decisions. Mass protests are continuing into the night and crowds are filling the streets of Tel Aviv after the dismissal of Mr. Gallant. Leaders in the arts sector fear that budget cuts could sabotage Auckland's cultural events. Amber Kerr from Te Pou Theatre says the industry is still suffering after the COVID-19 pandemic. She says Auckland Council's planned funding cuts would damage the city's identity.
People come for free and get to engage in that kind of community building, identity building activities. When we call it the arts, it seems that people seem to put it in a little box. But the arts is about building who we are as people and communicating that and sharing in it together.
Amber Kerr says she fears for the future of the arts industry if young creators can't access funding. Hamilton City Council is trialling the use of an anti-skid spray to make it harder for car enthusiasts to do burnouts on streets. The council's networks operations team leader, Robin Denton, says the spray will be applied to 3 streets popular with the races. Council spokesperson Robin Denton says the spray is normally used for locations where extra skid resistance is needed, such as tight corners and pedestrian crossings. She says it will cost around $30,000, mainly for the traffic management when the spray is being applied. And that's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. On 9 to noon tomorrow, amid debate about the shape of the school curriculum, what would it really take to improve Kiwi kids' maths ability? How New Zealand's approach to exports affects our food security. Are parking fines out of proportion? And are supermarket specials as good as they seem? And we meet the World Chess Champions in New Zealand to encourage more girls and women to take up the game. With me on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
This is RNZ National on air online, on digital TV, on iHeartRadio. We'll be back with Lisa Owen and the Checkpoint team very shortly, but right now the short forecast. This is until midnight Tuesday from Met Service. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty. Isolated showers, possibly thundery about inland Bay of Plenty and Rotorua today. Waikato, Waitomo, Taumaranui and Taupo. Scattered showers, mainly afternoons and evenings, possibly thundery today. Taranaki to Kapiti. Isolated showers today, showers tomorrow, rain for a time. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Taihape and Wellington, scattered showers and possible thunderstorms about Hawke's Bay and Gisborne today, rain spreading north from midday tomorrow. For Nelson, Buller, Westland, isolated showers, rain spreading north overnight, clearing tomorrow. For Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago, rain spreading north tonight, tomorrow morning, and then easing to scattered showers with snow above 500 metres in Canterbury and Otago. And for your land and Southland, rain spreading north this evening and overnight, snow above 400 metres, possibly heavy. Showers tomorrow with snow above 400 metres in the morning. The Chatham Islands, showers for tomorrow. Well, that's it with the news. I'll have headlines for you in about 15 minutes or so, and of course more news at 7. It's 8 minutes past 6.
Kia ora rā e ho, no mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. We've been shunned and kicked in the guts, that from a resident of one of the hardest hit cyclone regions. Residents from the Esk Valley and Hawke's Bay met at the weekend to vent their frustration at the lack of progress 2 months on from the extreme weather event. They remain concerned about crime levels in the region, but the new Police Minister, Ginny Anderson, didn't attend despite being invited. Whirinaki resident Louise Parsons organised the public meeting and is with us now. Hi, Louise.
Hello, Lisa.
How would you kind of describe the feeling of the residents at the meeting, the kind of tone?
Utter frustration, I would have thought. And I think it's getting to the point where people are just tired and getting a bit angry. And so we're talking about our community out at Esk Valley, which was hard hit, but I did visit Pakawhai today, and, you know, that's probably worse. The looting that's going on there at the moment is out of control, and, you know, this is an area that is right between Hastings and Napier. You've got to drive through it, drive past it basically to commute, and there's still no power. No one's living there because they were so devastated in the floods, and they're just getting looted, and, you know, people are not on their properties, so they aren't sleeping because they're wondering what the hell's going on in their properties. So it's pretty dire.
Louise, tell me a bit more about that. What's been taken? How? Are we talking about rubbish that's been discarded outside of property? Are they entering houses? Give me a bit more detail.
No, they're entering houses because there is no discarded property outside the houses anymore. That's been cleared away. So we're talking about people going into people's sheds and taking things.
Like what? What kind of stuff?
So there's tools that have been salvaged, wheels off cars. There's all sorts of things.
So do you mean flood-damaged vehicles? They're taking tyres off
the
them?
Flood-damaged, yeah. So a personal friend of mine that lives there, so her car, they were on the top story of a two-storey house. That's where they got rescued from by a boat. And the boat had to literally drive over her car. That's how deep the floodwaters were. And so when they came back, and the floods had subsided, her car was absolutely totaled, of course. And, you know, 2.5 weeks ago, the tyres were taken off it. Her daughter's car was outside. This is quite heartbreaking. Her daughter's car was outside, teenage daughter, first car, and that was flood damaged as well, complete write-off. But then they came back, took the tyres off that. They broke into it on another occasion, and then just last night, the night before the meeting, they came back and vandaled the car. And the heartbreaking bit about that was my friend said to me, we really shouldn't have left it outside. And it's just like, really? Is that what we've come to?
So, Louise, obviously, I'm sure you'll appreciate those cars are written off, right? They're rubbish, they're junk. But tell me, is it that sense of someone violating your space, coming into your property?
Yeah, because this was happening in our community when everyone's possessions were out on the street, and they're trying to salvage as much personal stuff that they're actually meaningful stuff. Because you're right, some of it's not meaningful; it's just stuff, but it's their life, it's their memories, it's their life out on the street. And when you think about people coming into your community and just helping themselves to that, I can't even describe how deplorable that is. It's like, I liken it to vultures picking the bones off a corpse, It's like, have some compassion. And they're not taking them because they're in need. They're taking them because they're then trying to sell this stuff.
How do you know that, Louise?
I do know that because people were arrested taking tools off a neighbour of mine, and these were tools that they'd put out on the street. They took the tools from their pile of debris that they still hadn't been through themselves to see what they could salvage. And these guys were caught down Tai-Happy Way, trying to, with all the tools on board, and a digger, of all things, on a trailer, which is probably not theirs either.
So you are obviously, there's a gap between the residents and what they see happening in their feelings and what the police and the police minister are saying. And they continue to say that crime is not on the rise where you are.
Yeah.
So what is it that you want? Because there's been talk about the military and the army. Explain what you think they would be useful for.
So kudos to Stuart Nash, because he turned up at the meeting. He was police minister when we had the first meeting. The first meeting was for the politicians that had anything to do with justice and police to be invited. And they all came. No one spoke because they listened. They listened to the community because we keep getting accused of hearsay and rumours. So that's why I did the first meeting, was to say, actually, it's not hearsay. Here's the people. This is who's affected. Here's some real stories. And as a result of that meeting, we got a police caravan out here and in Puketapu, and much more police presence. So it's been, it's actually a bit more comforting to people. But the army should be here. They should be cutting off, like Pakafai today. There's no reason for anyone to be going down that street, and so the army should be deployed to stop people going down those streets. The police can't cope with it. There's not enough resources. So get the army. What are the army doing right now? They should be in our communities, even helping with the cleanup. They should be helping with security. That would make us vulnerable. And when I say us, I'm talking about our community, because my house was not affected. But it would help people to feel safer. They'd be able to sleep at night, knowing that there is some security out there. It's a free-for-all at the moment. And there's no two ways. Labor have lost the fight to crime, because if they think that the stats right now is reflective of the pre-cyclone, then we're in big trouble. We're in big trouble as a society.
What about the clean-up? How is that going? Because you see individuals out there cleaning up their individual properties with a wheelbarrow and a spade, and it's weeks on. Is there any call from the residents for some kind of collective clean-up with resources from somewhere else, like the army?
Yeah, absolutely.
And what response are you getting to that, Louise?
Well, so the clean-up response, in Esk, where I am, in Eastdale and Esk Valley, Whirinaki, blah, 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 it was a hard hit. And everyone just got out there and did it. If we waited for people to help, it was not going to be coming. And, you've got to be respectful of the rescue first. That was obviously a priority. Second priority should have been security with army deployed. That didn't happen. And now the cleanup. And, the person I visited today, who is in Pakafai, she said, we've not seen anybody. Until she came to the meeting last night, because I invited the residents of Pakafai, they said, we've not seen one official, nothing, nobody. And so they're just feeling like, why do we have to do the cleanup? And everyone's just gone out and done it. If it hadn't been for friends and family and the goodness, the kindness of these amazing people that came into our region from all over New Zealand, they'd be stuffed. So there needs to be, and there's also funding issues. The funding's not getting through.
Do you know people who've applied to the business fund and not received anything?
Everybody. There's none of it's been paid out yet. And these are people that are running businesses.
That is a sweeping statement, Louise. Do you think nobody has got money from their applications?
Because what's happened is they've got $7 million to hand out, and there's about a need for about 40 million. And so the chamber who are managing it, God love them because they're trying their very, very best. They're not handing any of it out until they can figure out who gets it and who doesn't. Because who gets to make that decision? I mean, what an awful situation to be in, that they have to decide, you get to keep your business, you don't. There's not enough money there. So, no, they've put a halt on it. And so people are trying to pay wages and there's no money.
Thank you for joining us, Louise. Appreciate your time. That's Louise Parsons, who organised that residents' meeting with Esk Valley residents and people from the surrounding area who were very badly hit during the cyclone. 17 minutes after 6, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. There are warnings of more tornadoes in southern parts of the United States after at least 26 people died when a fierce storm swept through Mississippi, Alabama and Georgia. In Rolling Fork, Mississippi, an elderly couple were killed when a tornado threw the neighbour's 18-wheeler truck onto their home. The governor is promising to rebuild, but some residents worry many simply won't return after the devastation. The ABC's Carrington Clark reports.
Darren McGee is searching through the pile of rubble of what used to be his mother-in-law's home. He has only a thin pair of shoes on, which have been repeatedly punctured by nails.
And I'm just looking for my boots now, so once I get to my boots, I got a pair of boots over here and a pair of boots over there, then I should be able to walk around a little better than I'm tiptoeing now.
He was in the house with his wife and mother-in-law when the tornado struck at around 8 p.m. on Friday.
And as soon as I got to the bathroom door, that's when I went. So the force of everything just took me down.
Darren says it felt like it was over in seconds, though it's possible he blacked out. But the next thing he remembers was pushing bits of wall and roof off himself and trying to find his family.
And I was screaming. I was like, I started screaming my wife named Cynthia. And I started screaming my mother-in-law. And then I heard I heard my wife said she was over here. I said, oh, okay. So that's when I started moving stuff and getting it out the way, and I got her.
Remarkably, Darren only has a few cuts and bruises and says he feels okay. His mother-in-law remains in hospital with chest pains. Their home had stood on Mulberry Street, which is close to the centre of the small town of Rolling Fork. Almost every house here looks like theirs, obliterated. The governor of Mississippi, Tate Reeves, was walking the street and promised support.
We're going to come back, and we've got great leadership here with the mayor, and we appreciate our federal assets being here, and we're going to make sure we get the help to the people who need it, and that's number one message, but also just being here and telling people we love them and we care about them.
As they wait for more help, residents are pitching together, including Sharon Stiegel. She lives across town and her property was mostly unscathed, but she worries that Rolling Fork might never be the same again.
We have a lot of elderly people, and some elderly people, I'm afraid, won't. Businesses is another thing. What are people going to do from now till they don't have any jobs? What are they going to do? Are they going to leave?
The sun is currently shining here in Rolling Fork as people continue to recover what they can, but more bad weather is predicted for southern US states in coming days. Many in the area known as Tornado Valley will be bracing themselves, hoping their town doesn't become the next Rolling Fork.
New research shows most Australians would support banning gambling ads during certain times of the day. The study also shows younger people are being influenced to start betting or to gamble more often because of the frequency of the ads. The ABC's Oliver Gordon reports.
Despite warnings like these,
what are you really gambling with? For free and confidential support, call the number on the screen or visit the website.
Most Australians are still concerned by the prevalence of gambling ads. A new report by the Australian Gambling Research Centre shows 2 in 3 Australians think wagering advertising is too common. 53% think it normalises gambling among children. Dr Rebecca Jenkinson helped write the report and says around 3/4 of Australians gambled in the last year.
Mostly that was on lotteries and scratchies, but around a third of Australians were gambling on
racing, sports and pokies as well. And really of concern for us is the level of harm experienced by these people. So in this study we found that almost half of those who gambled would be classified as being at risk of gambling harm.
About half the 1,700 people surveyed supported banning broadcast advertising before 10:30pm, as well as celebrity or athlete endorsements.
For half of the participants in this study, they said it's actually decreasing their enjoyment of sport. So we'd like to see further restrictions, and I think people's enjoyment of sport, it's a big part of our culture, obviously. This matters. I think people really do want to see a reduction in the number and types of ads that we're all exposed to.
Federal Communications Minister Michelle Rowland has told RN Breakfast the research will help inform the Albanese government's efforts to tackle gambling harm, which are already underway.
We actually have this week tougher restrictions on gambling advertising being implemented, as well as enhanced training. Now, this is a National Consumer Protection Framework that was begun years ago, which wasn't progressed quickly enough, and which even in the first year of this government we have picked up and we are executing. We also will have the bet stop system in place as soon as that testing is ready and is ready to be proclaimed. The regulator is currently going through that process. But we are absolutely getting on with the job of keeping Australians safe.
But gambling researcher Dr. Charles Livingston from Monash University says other countries have gone further.
A number of European jurisdictions have now prohibited gambling advertising, and that includes Italy and Belgium quite recently, and other countries are looking at doing it or restricting it much more than has been the case. And that's, I think, because in those jurisdictions there's a real acknowledgement that there is a real link between advertising and the uptake of gambling, and that for many people, particularly young people, that's just, simply not good enough for people anymore. I think particularly people with children are recognising that.
What are the major hurdles getting in the way of this reform?
There's a lot of money involved in it, basically. The broadcast media in particular make significant amounts of money from it. We're looking at, close to $300 million a year being spent on advertising by these wagering operators, and that's a huge amount of money, particularly in a media environment where those sort of funds are hard to come by. And the sports themselves, I mean, there's an enormous amount of activity on betting platforms around the AFL and NRL, and their broadcast rights are to some degree contingent upon this. So we need to find a way to wean these sports off that money and to ensure that the broadcast media can be persuaded to look for alternative sources of revenue, just as we did when we started prohibiting tobacco advertising some years ago.
The possession of laughing gas will be banned in the UK as part of a wider government crackdown on antisocial behaviour. The gas, nitrous oxide, is used in medicine as an anaesthetic, but when taken as a psychoactive drug, the government says it can lead to antisocial behaviour. Sold in metal canisters known as NOS, it's one of the most used drugs by 16 to 24-year-olds in the UK. The BBC's Ian Watson reports.
To the government, these little silver canisters are a symbol of antisocial behaviour. The gas they contained, nitrous oxide, can lead to feelings of euphoria when inhaled. But ministers say it can also harm the health of young people in particular, and this littering that blights local communities is no laughing matter.
These are public spaces that should be safe and orderly. Once you begin to retreat from these public spaces, once you say anything goes, then, as we know, what appear to be small infringements turn into a greater degree of lawlessness.
There are already restrictions on the supply of nitrous oxide, also known as laughing gas or hippie crack, but the government will now overrule its own expert advisors on drugs by banning its possession.
Sales of nitrous oxide are already illegal. Littering is already illegal. Using whilst driving is already illegal. We don't need to criminalise 500,000 young people to tackle those problems. We just need to use the existing controls and laws that are in place. So this feels like sort of political theatre.
Labour, though, is broadly in favour of taking a stronger stance.
We want to see it banned as well, because I think it does cause a huge amount of littering, of disruption and of antisocial behaviour.
It was when Tony Blair was here in Downing Street that antisocial behaviour orders were first introduced. But 25 years on, Both government and opposition have seen polling which suggests that some voters believe their concerns are being ignored. So when Rishi Sunak overrules expert advice on laughing gas, that may well be a way of trying to symbolise that he's listening to concerned communities. In a wider plan to tackle antisocial behaviour, which will be unveiled tomorrow, those guilty of vandalism will be expected to repair rapidly the damage they've caused. And Labour say cuts to neighbourhood policing are making it more difficult to catch the culprits. At the next election, expect a competition between the parties on who can be tougher on crime.
Well, becoming a father at the age of 90 is not common, but for the oldest animal at the Houston Zoo, a tortoise named Mr. Pickles, it was no big deal. CNN's Jeannie Moose reports.
Tongues are wagging at the Houston Zoo. All eyes are on the zoo's oldest resident, a 90-year-old tortoise named Mr. Pickles, who has managed to father 3 little pickles named in keeping with the pickle theme.
So dill, gherkin, and jalapeno.
Their 90-year-old father was dubbed Playa for his virility, celebrated with attaboy. Is it a big deal that he could sire these babies at age 90?
It is a big deal. So it's a big deal that, well, he could sire them, but also that our animal care staff, our herpetology keeper, happened to be in the right place at the right time.
The keeper stumbled on Mrs. Pickles laying her eggs and moved them to safety. Houston soil isn't conducive to incubating the eggs of the endangered radiant tortoise, native to Madagascar. Now Mr. Pickles has become the Larry King of the tortoise world. Though truth be told, the departed talk show host fathered his last child at 66. So Larry's a piker compared to Mr. Pickles. That son of Larry's displayed a healthy fear of poisonous frogs.
So the dog eats it? No, he's not going to hurt you.
Get away from me.
Like Larry, Mr. Pickles has a much younger mate. Mrs. Pickles is 53. The pair had only one other hatchling, so to have 3 this late in life, well, it's a little like the tortoise and the hare.
The lagging tortoise very slowly crawled along.
But when the hare lollygagged, the tortoise triumphed. Slow and steady, Mr. Pickles won the race to procreate.
Mr. Pickles looks pretty chuffed with himself. Before we head off, we've this bit of feedback from someone in the cyclone-damaged areas of Hawke's Bay. What we're going through in Fernhill, Pakowhai and Esk Valley is horrific. We've been abandoned by the government. The relief that's to be funnelled by the Chamber of Commerce is not happening 7 weeks on. There's been no relief given out. We have no money, no home, no business. They're apparently meeting twice a week to look into applications. It is an absolute shit show, this person says. COVID response amazing, localised disaster pathetic, they say. That is all we have time for this evening. The Late News team's going to keep you updated throughout the night. You can find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a popo tomorrow from 5 a.m. First up, reports on a heated meeting between politicians and West Auckland flood victims who are losing patience at the lack of progress on their wrecked homes. Tune in at 5 a.m. and we'll catch you a little later in the day.
Thank you, Lisa. Now let's look at the news headlines. Greens co-leader Marama Davidson has acknowledged she misspoke when she said white cis men are responsible for violence during a heated exchange with a far-right activist at the weekend. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says the minister's comments were inappropriate. And Mr Hipkins also says letting Posey Parker into the country was the right decision, but the right to free speech does not extend to physical violence. The High Court has said 2 men whose sons died in the Pike River mine can now see